animals and the wilderness awakens, hidden cameras capture what we were never meant to see. This video is absolutely no exception to that. This video was taken back in 2006 in the Catalonian forest, where two men and their families were on a camping trip. I'm not entirely sure what led up to the men taking this video or why they were walking around the forest at night, but regardless of how they got into this position, what happened next is something I'm sure they will never forget. As they walk deeper into this forest, something catches their attention. They see what looks like a mysterious creature on top of a tree branch. As they see the creature, they obviously stop walking and are filming it, scared for what it might be. The forest is of course full of dangerous animals, so it's always good to proceed with caution, but I'm sure these men had no idea just how scary this creature was about to become. As the light from the recorder shines on the creature and the men try to get a closer look, the creature turns its face to look directly at them. The creature's eyes glow in the light with a human-looking head but an inhuman-feeling aura. The men quickly book it out of there, and I have to say, I would do exactly the same thing. After experiencing something like that, I don't think you could ever catch me in the woods again. In our number 9 spot today, we have the skinwalker in the woods. This creepy video was posted to TikTok by the user Adrian Montenegro 02, and it was supposed to be just a casual video showing a camping trip with their family that they were taking near Monterrey in Mexico. It should just be a nice casual fun family trip, right? Wrong. Of course not. This video shows the family all hanging out together, with one member being pushed on a swing by a couple other members. This is all fine and well, but it's what's in the background that really has viewers concerned, and definitely had the family freaking out when they reviewed the footage. In the back, you see a creepy figure moving around. This figure is pale and human looking, and it just moves around quietly, like it's trying not to be seen. Is it hiding from the family? Is it planning something sinister? After posting, many viewers began putting forth their theories. Some believe the figure seen in the back is a skinwalker, while others believe it is someone who lives in the woods waiting for their moment to strike. At the end of the day, whatever this thing is, it is sure unsettling, and all I can ask is, why is it watching this family's vacation? In our number 8 spot today, we have Bigfoot. Would this list truly be complete without the sighting of a supposed Bigfoot? This video comes from 2015, when a man named McCamey reported seeing a strange, unexplainable creature hiding in the woods. McCamey was kayaking in a swamp close to Tampa in Florida when he heard a noise, and then he began to see some strange movement. He started recording what he thought was likely a bear or a similar kind of animal, but as he got closer, he realized that something more unusual was going on. The creature began to navigate through the alligator-infested water with ease, and it began using its arms to swing through the branches, which is something that isn't really commonly seen with bears, as far as I know. Some people believe this video is a hoax, while others believe this is full-blown proof that Bigfoot is alive and well and living in Florida. What do you think? In our number 7 spot today, we have a cult meeting. This next video comes from a group of friends who were on a casual hike, enjoying themselves, getting some fresh air and exercise, but little did they know they were about to stumble upon something a lot more sinister than a typical day outdoors. As they are hiking on the trail and up a hill, they look back and see some kind of weird secret cult or secret society type meeting. These people begin walking, dressed in white robes, and while that obviously isn't any kind of a crime, it's bizarre, to say the least. The person who took the video also posted another video of this strange encounter, because these people didn't just look creepy, they were also making creepy sounds. I can't tell if the sound is music, singing, chanting, screaming, I'm not entirely sure, but whatever it is, it was all creepy enough for these guys to stop their hike, record, and post it on the internet for all of us to watch and wonder, what exactly is going on here? In our number 6 spot today, we have the backyard horror. This video starts off with someone recording in their home. We quickly find out that the reason they started recording is because they noticed something strange in their backyard. Never a good way to start off a video. He apparently was hearing weird voices coming from outside of his house, and of course wanted to record as he investigated, and well, Good thing he did. He turns the lights off inside so that he could see what was going on outside better, and, well, absolute nightmare fuel ensues when he does this. As he turns the camera to the dark backyard, he suddenly sees a human-like creature come darting towards him. The figure appears to have come from a bush in the backyard, and who knows how long it had been there for. What is so creepy to me is that this creature clearly knew he was looking into the yard at this point, so I want to know how long it was there for, watching him through the windows. Also, what the hell is that thing? Let me know. In our number 5 spot today, we have the creepy figure. This video starts off with a group of men riding their motorcycles through the woods, which honestly already sounds challenging enough. The video seems to be progressing as one would expect until things take a turn for the worse. Quickly, the video descends into terror and madness as they realize that something or someone is chasing them. You can hear one of the men yelling and screaming for help as the other men in front of him begin to pull over and try and figure out what is happening. That would be absolutely jarring to be just on a fun day out with your friends when suddenly one of them starts screaming for help. Absolutely terrifying already, but I don't think any of the men were expecting to see what happens next. A creepy human-like creature can be seen chasing the men, and when one of them gets off the bike, it begins coming up to the bike and toward the group. The men are caught between being utterly terrified of this encounter while also trying to protect their bike from damage or being stolen. You can absolutely hear the panic in their voices as they try to figure out what exactly is going on. In our number 4 spot today, we have this weird creature. This video comes from Australia, which is of course the land of creepy creatures, and whatever is caught on this video is certainly no exception. The person who captured the video was driving through a deserted forest at night, which just already feels like you're asking for trouble. As they are driving through this creepy area and recording, something appears in front of the car. This creature, whatever it is, although it doesn't look like any animals that I know of, quickly disappears just as quickly as it did appear, moving in a strange and very fast way. Let's take another look at this thing, but slow down a bit. Honestly, I have no explanation for what this is or what it could be. Some believe it's a skinwalker, others believe it's a demon. Whatever you want to believe, let's just hope you never cross paths with it. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Appalachian Trail footage. This next creepy video comes from someone who was hiking by themselves along the Appalachian Trail. He was resting in his tent, again, all alone, when suddenly he began to hear a terrifying screeching sound. I guess when you're out in the wilderness all alone, you really have no choice but to investigate the creepy sound. Better to know where it's coming from than just wait and see and hope for the best. He gets out of his tent and begins recording the sound as he calls out for any response to what could be making this horrifying sound. You can hear the fear in his voice as he tries to shine his light and see as far as he can in the pitch black wilderness. The noise sounds as though it's getting closer and closer, and you can faintly see shadows moving in between the trees as if something knows he is there and is coming to take a look. At one point, it even looks like you can maybe see the reflection of eyes off in the distance. It isn't quite clear exactly what he encountered that day, but whatever it is, I wouldn't want to meet it face to face. In our number 2 spot today, we have the creepy man. This video was taken in a remote area in Montana, out in what appears to be some kind of forest area. Now, a lot of the videos on today's list feature unknown creatures and creepy looking things, but this video looks like it just captures a man. The man gives off a kind of weird vibe to begin with. I mean, he's just standing alone in the woods, which is kind of weird. But the people recording call out to him to see if he's okay, if he needs any help, just to double check, which, you know, that's very nice of them. Unfortunately, instead of just a regular casual encounter, this man suddenly turns into an absolute nightmare. The man begins to move towards the people recording, but not in a normal human way, in a creepy, crawling way that would make anyone feel absolutely disturbed. Was this just a creepy person trying to freak someone out, or was something a little bit more paranormal at play? And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the graveyard ghost. Okay, I'll be honest, this video doesn't take place on a trail or in the woods, but it does take place somewhere equally as creepy, and that is a graveyard, perhaps one of the creepiest places on Earth. It isn't quite clear exactly where this graveyard is, but the person who took the video had initially gone there because they apparently had been hearing some strange noises coming from the cemetery for several days. I feel like if I had heard a strange noise coming from a cemetery, I'd probably call the police, or Ed and Lorraine Warren. The last thing I would ever do would be to take it upon myself to investigate. The curious video taker is clearly braver than I because they went to explore and definitely found more than they had bargained for. I have absolutely no idea what this thing is, with its elongated limbs and creepy posture. I'm not sure how the person taking the video was able to stand there for so long, but I feel like fight or flight really took over in this case. Was this a ghost, a demon, a zombie? Honestly, at this point, the possibilities are endless.
Gerald and Alice Uden weren't each other's first loves. In fact, they were far from it. Both of them had been married before they met, and both of them had a secret. In 1974, Alice Uden was a mother married to a man named Ronald Holtz. But less than a year and a half later, Alice filed for divorce. Only problem was, Holtz was nowhere to be found. In 1980, Gerald Uden was married and a stepfather to 2 sons, until one day both his wife and her sons mysteriously vanished. When Gerald and Alice met, they fell in love and started a life together. They went to church and engaged in pleasant conversations with their neighbors, one of which was quoted saying, "They're the kind of neighbors you leaned over the fence and talked about your chickens with." They were, as far as anyone knew, the definition of the wholesome old couple next door. But all of that changed when the pair entered their 70s. It was then that Alice's son Todd told police that his mother had once admitted to killing his father, her husband, and hiding the body in a gold mine. After the shocking revelation about Alice came out, police decided to begin looking into Gerald's past, which is when they found out that the pair had way more in common than previously thought. Gerald confessed to killing his ex-wife and her 2 sons with a hunting weapon she had actually gotten him as a present. Gerald was charged with killing in the first degree, and Alice, who claimed to have killed her husband in an act of self-defense, was charged with man 1.
Joseph Terracone was a man from the US who, in the 80s, was involved in a truly horrifying family scandal that went under the radar for decades. Joseph Terracone was a man from the US who in the late 70s was involved in a truly horrifying family scandal that went under the radar for decades. Terracone disappeared in 1978 after visiting his daughter in Hawaii. For nearly 30 years, no one knew what happened to him. His entire family was left completely in the dark. But the truth was finally uncovered in 2007. Terracone had been in a relationship with a woman named Renee Curtis at the time of his disappearance. When the relationship started to sour, Curtis and her brother Nicholas Notaro decided to get rid of him. Notaro fired at Terracone twice in the head. To cover up the crime, he and Curtis dismembered the body with a chainsaw and buried the remains. And the secret remained buried until construction workers discovered the body parts while demolishing Curtis's old house. Yeah, for some reason they figured home would be the best place to keep a dead body. Notaro admitted to the killing and was sentenced to life in prison. Curtis also confessed to helping dispose of the body, but denied having any involvement in planning the crime. Despite her claims though, she was also given a full life sentence.
In 1983, UK dentist Colin Howell and housewife Hazel Stewart were madly in love. Only problem was they were married and not to each other. After a while of hiding their affair and many repeated attempts at reconciling their own respective marriages, the two came up with a plan: to kill their current spouses and run away together. In 1991, Colin Howell poisoned his wife to death with carbon monoxide before arriving at his mistress, Hazel Stewart's house. In 1991, Colin Howell poisoned his wife to death with carbon monoxide before arriving at his mistress, Hazel Stewart's house, his wife's body in hand. When Colin arrived, Stewart set her half of the plan into action and did the same thing to her husband Howell had done to his wife. After both of their prospective spouses were dead, Howell and Stewart staged a scene. They propped both of the bodies up in a car in Stewart's garage to make it seem as though the pair had taken their own lives. And after all that, Howell and Stewart went their separate ways. Colin Howell eventually remarried and for a while lived a relatively normal life until one day he confessed his crime to his new wife. At first, she urged him to keep quiet for the sake of their family, but eventually, after Howell fell into some financial troubles and began cheating again, his wife changed her mind and ultimately turned Howell into the police. He received a prison term of 21 years and his co-conspirator Hazel Stewart a minimum of 18 years behind bars.
Skidmore, Missouri is a very small town with a very big, dark secret, and it's not just one family's secret, it's the entire town's. This is the case of Ken Rex McElroy, the boogeyman of Skidmore, whose story almost plays out like a real-life version of Nightmare on Elm Street. So back in the 60s and 70s, Skidmore was ruled by a man named Ken McElroy, who was infamous for being a total bully and a criminal. He pretty much ran the town, and for over 2 decades, he reigned over it like a mad dictator. He'd steal from local farmers and businesses, commit violence on townsfolk at will, and engaged in all sorts of other criminal behavior. He also had multiple wives, many of whom he'd just taken unwillingly. With the help of a mob-connected lawyer, McElroy was virtually untouchable, intimidating anyone who dared to press charges. He would stalk people, kill people's pets, burn homes and businesses to the ground in order to maintain his grip on the town. By July of 1981, though, people had had enough. A mob of fed-up locals who'd endured years of his terror surrounded him in the center of town and opened fire. McElroy was shot dead, but not one of the more than 50 witnesses came forward to identify who pulled the trigger, and no one was ever arrested. To this day, every single witness has refused to talk and the case remains unsolved.
Diane Stout lost her husband and her son and witnessed her daughter grow incredibly ill in the span of just 1 year. Her husband passed without warning, seemingly of natural causes. Her son died of what seemed to be seizure-related complications, and one of her daughters, Sarah, was rushed to hospital requiring emergency attention for flu-like symptoms that later revealed themselves to be the result of organ failure. While one might think Diane to have been crushed by this dark series of unfortunate events, many were surprised and deeply disturbed to notice how cheerful she remained throughout the entirety of each ordeal. At the funeral of both her husband and her son, she seemed pretty unmoved and, as I said to some, almost happy. When her daughter almost lost her life to organ failure, Diane spent the majority of her time in the hospital making jokes about going on vacation. All of this strange behavior eventually led people to suspect that the deaths and illnesses that occurred in the family were no mere fluke of nature, but rather the doing of Diane herself. It turns out Diane had actually been conspiring with her other daughter Rachel to kill off the rest of the family one by one until only the 2 of them remained. For their crimes, both women were sentenced to life behind bars.
This next story comes to us from a now deleted Reddit user, and if this is true, it's absolutely nuts. So it goes like this. My uncle was working near Vancouver on a farm. He had been working there for a while, while my dad worked on a different farm not too far away. Well, the guy my uncle worked for had a bunch of pigs and would often have pig roasts and invite a bunch of people over. He would also sell the pork to people in nearby towns. While at the same time, a bunch of women were going missing. After a while, my uncle left and didn't speak to the man again. Turns out, the farmer had killed 49 women and fed them to his pigs. He'd also mixed them with the pork that he sold. So basically, my uncle and many people were unknowingly eating people. End of post. So there was a very real case where this happened. Robert Pickton's the man. We've talked about him before on the channel. One of the most disgusting serial killers in history. So if this Redditor's story is true, his uncle knew the guy, and not only that, he may have eaten human remains on more than one occasion. That is crazy.
The first time Charlie Brandt ever claimed a life was in January of 1971. He was young and filled with rage. In a fit of violence, he claimed the life of his mother and attempted to claim the life of his father by firing a weapon at both of them multiple times. He would have taken the life of his sister too, but his weapon jammed and she was able to fight him off. While you'd think this would be the end of the story, it unfortunately isn't. Because of Charlie Brandt's age, prosecutors declined to charge him, and eventually he, his father, and his sister just decided to put the incident behind them, which is probably the dumbest thing I've heard all year, and they went about their lives like nothing had happened. In 2004, Brandt and his wife Terry were staying with Terry's niece Michelle in Orlando, which is when, in an act of unprovoked violence, Brandt impaled his wife several times in the chest before moving on to attack Michelle. After he was satisfied and positive that both Terry and Michelle were dead, he took his own life. After his death, police linked Brandt to the 1989 killing of a woman named Sherry Parisho, and while he has not yet been linked to the death of any others, police are incredibly inclined to believe that Brandt's hit list is a lot longer in real life than it is on paper.
Fred and Rose West were a British couple who, on the surface, seemed like any other suburban family. I mean, looking at this photo, would you ever think they were responsible for a string of heinous, sickening, disturbing crimes? Fred, maybe, he kind of has that sinister grin, but Rose, she looks like a sweet librarian or a school teacher. But in this case, she was just as involved in the crimes as her husband was. Behind their seemingly normal public image was a house of horrors, and the couple would begin being investigated in 1992. Neighbors and friends saw them as an average couple, raising their family, running a business. To the outside world, they were just another hard-working family, but the reality was far more sinister. The Wests were involved in a series of horrific crimes, including the killings of several young women who would endure horrendous torment beforehand, and they'd hide their remains in the cellar or the garden. In 1994, police were investigating the disappearance of their daughter, Heather. What police were not expecting to find were numerous bodies buried around their property. The couple were arrested and charged. Fred took his own life in 1995, and Rose is still rotting away in prison where she belongs.
In 1893, John List, a former military man, moved into a massive mansion in Westfield, New Jersey, accompanied by his mother, his wife Helen, their daughter Patricia, and their sons Frederick and John Jr. For a while, they lived happily, but by November of 1971, things had taken a serious turn for the worst. John, who had already been experiencing some pretty severe financial difficulties, lost his job, and he snapped. While his daughter and sons were out of the house, he took the life of his mother and his wife. When his daughter Patricia and his son Frederick arrived home, he took their lives too. And then he stopped to make some lunch. After finishing up in the kitchen, he drove away from his home, picked up his remaining son John Jr., took him back to the home, and, as you can probably guess, took his life too. After that, he placed the bodies of his wife, his daughter, and his two sons in sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom. He left his mother in her room in the attic, and then he skipped town. In 1989, John remarried, and in 1990, he confessed to his crime, saying that he had only killed his family because he believed it was better to send them to heaven rather than have them share in his financial hardships, a sentiment shared by absolutely no one. For his crimes, John List was given 5 consecutive life sentences, although in the end, he only spent about 18 years in prison, the same number of years it took to catch him, because he died in his cell on March 21st of 2008 at the age of 82.
The Monniers were a very wealthy family living in Poitiers, France. They were of noble origin, they were well respected and happy. But in 1876, everything changed. Louise Monnier's daughter, Blanche, had gone missing. She and Blanche's older brother, Marcel, were incredibly worried. None of her friends knew where she was. She never left a note. It was as if she'd just vanished into thin air. 25 years passed, and then there was no sign of Blanche, and Marcel and Louise had more or less accepted that they'd never see her again. In May of 1901, the Paris Attorney General received an anonymous letter, though, reading, "Monsieur Attorney General, I have the honor to inform you of an exceptionally serious occurrence. I speak of a spinster who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house, half-starved and living on a putrid litter for the past 25 years. In a word, in her own filth." When police went to investigate, what they found was, shockingly, exactly what was detailed in the letter. An emaciated woman locked up in a small room where she'd been for the last 25 years. Blanche Monnier. She'd been locked away by her very own mother, and Marcel knew about it as well. But why? Well, it was all because Blanche had wanted to marry a man that the rest of the family didn't approve of. If you think Elizabeth Bathory was evil, just wait till you hear about Delphine Lalaurie. This mansion is said to be one of the most haunted places in New Orleans, and that is saying a lot because New Orleans has a bit of a reputation for being pretty paranormally active. This was not a tough list to put together by any means. The Lalaurie Mansion is a historic house in the French Quarter, which was the site of an incredibly twisted crime, or series of crimes. Madame Delphine McCarthy Lalaurie and her third husband, Dr. Louis Lalaurie, moved there in 1832. They were socialites known for hosting extravagant parties, but in 1834, the couple's gruesome secrets were revealed when a fire broke out. As firefighters rushed in to control the blaze, they came across a gruesome scene in the mansion's attic. Now, before this incident, Lalaurie did have a track record of mistreating her slaves, but no one really knew the true extent of her cruelty. At least 7 people were found to be victims of extreme torment and mutilation. There had been experiments performed on them. They were missing limbs. Some had been kept in cages. And she got away with it, too. Lalaurie and her husband fled to Paris, and she died peacefully in her home about 30 years later. Next on the list we have Tableau Restaurant. It really seems like every place you go in New Orleans is haunted because this isn't even a place you'll find on ghost tours. Ghosts are to New Orleans like pizza is to New York. You just find great pizza on some random street corner, and sometimes it's not even a well-known spot. Here we have a video of a mysterious accident that was captured on a security camera at the restaurant. Take a look. So first of all, rude. This guy spent all this time sweeping the floor, and then this D-bag of a ghost has to knock a bunch of red wine off the shelf. Also, that's a waste of wine. Now, things do fall off shelves sometimes, sure, and if it was just like 1 or 2 wine bottles, I probably wouldn't think much of this, but they just keep coming. It's not just the bottles in front that fall, but the ones in back as well. It looks like they're being thrown out of the wine rack, which was built into the wall. So this is pretty strange. Now, could it be staged? Sure, but what do you think? Apparently odd stuff happens at this place all the time though. Doors will open on their own, the TVs will turn off and on by themselves. Definitely a place to check out. When it comes to haunted New Orleans cemeteries, St. Louis Cemetery is usually the first one to come up, but there are plenty of others, including St. Roch. St. Roch Cemetery was founded in 1874 by Reverend P.L. Thevis. Visitors have claimed some eerie stuff going on in this place, and there are 2 main apparitions people talk about seeing. First, there's the ghost of a dog, described as an unusually large black canine wandering through the cemetery. People will try to approach the dog, but then it mysteriously vanishes when cornered with no apparent escape route. So, a ghost dog. What's the story behind that? Well, interestingly, the cemetery named after St. Roch is also the patron saint of dogs, so a possible connection there. Another eerie presence reported is a hooded figure that roams through the cemetery. This mysterious entity is often seen either disappearing into thin air or just passing through the solid walls surrounding the cemetery grounds. Next on the list we have the Sultan's Palace. Now, a lot of haunted house stories play out in this very similar kind of fashion, right? We've all heard tons of them. Usually there's a family, usually from the 1800s or early 1900s. Members of the family die after some freak accident or are killed by a deranged member of the family, and then their tortured souls haunt the place, unable to cross over to the other side. Well, the story behind this place is almost more fascinating than its supposed haunting. So it was built in 1836, a beautiful piece of property that became known for the bizarre activities carried out by a Turkish man who moved in, claiming to be a sultan. Neighbors would talk about all the extravagant parties he'd throw, the constant loud music, this harem of women that had also accompanied him from Turkey, but locals were never invited to these parties. It was a mystery as to exactly what was going on. All the harem of women, I'm sure there were sounds. You could probably guess. But one morning, after a particularly stormy night, a passerby noticed a stream of liquid trickling down the steps of the Sultan's palace. Police arrived to inspect the house, and what they found inside was a complete massacre. There was so much red bodily fluid covering the place that there was a coppery scent in the air. Bodies were scattered everywhere, many gruesomely dismembered. As authorities explored the house more, the horror just continued, leading them finally to the courtyard, muddied by all the rain from the previous night, and sticking out from the heavy soil was a hand. Its fingers were spread like whoever was buried had been desperately reaching for help. It turned out to be the hand of the supposed Sultan. He'd been buried alive, and no one ever found out who did it. Of course, with all the death that happened there that night and how brutal it was, the spirits of those men and women are said to still linger within the walls of 716 Dauphine Street. Next up, we have the Haunted Hotel. That's actually just its name. There are a few ghosts said to haunt this place, and there better be with a name like that. But the star of the show is the ghost of an axe-wielding madman who terrorized the streets of New Orleans from 1918 to 1919. This unidentified individual targeted mainly Italian immigrants. He'd break into people's homes in the middle of the night, attacking his victims with an axe or a straight razor. It was pretty clear that the attacks were hate motivated, as the guy never actually took anything from their homes other than, of course, their lives. The city was gripped with fear, never knowing who was going to be the Axeman's next victim or when he was going to strike. But on March 13th of 1919, a mysterious letter was published in the paper, apparently coming from the Axeman himself. Part of the letter read, "To be exact, at 12:15 earthly time. On next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions, every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe." And jazz did fill the streets on the night, and there were no victims. So what's the connection to this hotel? Well, there's a theory that the Axeman may have been a handyman who rented out a room in what used to be the slave quarters where the hotel stands now. The story goes that a red-stained axe was found behind a wall during renovations of the building, and this axe may have belonged to the Axeman. Next, we have another infamous New Orleans spot, Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop. This place is a frequent stop on ghost tours. Now, taking one look at the place, it's easy to see why. The place looks lovely and quaint, but it's a relic. It doesn't look like it's changed a bit since the day it was built. If I had to guess what building on this block was teeming with paranormal activity, I'd point right at this place. Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop is named after the infamous pirate and privateer Jean Lafitte from the early 1800s. Lafitte became a local legend in New Orleans, particularly for aiding Andrew Jackson during the War of 1812. The main ghost said to haunt the place is said to be the spirit of John himself, and apparently that's not just a wild guess either, but because people claim to see him pretty clearly, a full-bodied figure dressed in sailor's gear. He's usually seen standing in dark corners near the first floor fireplace, silently observing, but as soon as he's spotted, he fades away into the shadows. On the second floor, staff and guests have claimed to see the apparition of an unknown woman, said to also whisper people's names in the middle of the night. Then there's the red eyes. Visitors will report seeing red eyes peering out of dark corners in the building, and once eye contact is made, the eyes freeze briefly before just fading away. The place looks fantastic, definitely a spot to hit up if I'm ever in New Orleans, and what really adds to the atmosphere here is that there's not much electricity. Candles provide most of the light. And now a haunted theater, La Petite Theater in the French Quarter. The building began operating as a theater in 1922, but it's been around since the late 1700s, so it has some history. Not only are there said to be ghosts of soldiers from the Civil War roaming the halls, but there have been tragic events since the property started operating as a theater as well, and the spirits of these tragedies are said to linger in the building to this very day. The Petite Theater also operates as a wedding venue, and one story goes that during a wedding ceremony years ago, the bride, for one reason or another, decided to take her own life, falling to her death up the side of the theater. And some say on occasion you can catch a glimpse of her ghostly figure standing at the exact spot she stood before jumping to her death. Imagine being that soon-to-be husband. Man. Way to feel low about yourself. You're about to get married and the bride wants to avoid this so much that she decides it's best, you know what, I'm just going to end it all. There's also said to be the ghost of an actress who accidentally fell to her death from the catwalk while getting frisky with a maintenance worker. There's the ghost of an angry nun who slaps people, the angry spirit of a former manager who took his own life in the staff office, and plenty more. So even when a show isn't sold out, they're still performing for a full audience. At 625 St. Philip Street now sits Flanagan's Pub, but this pub has a pretty morbid history. It used to be a morgue. The summer of 1853 was a bad time for New Orleans. The city was once again plagued by the yellow fever. Within just a few weeks, nearly 10,000 of the 50,000 people in the city were hit with yellow fever, 1/5 of the population, which is pretty nuts. There was, of course, a shortage of space for dead people, so places that weren't originally intended to be morgues started operating as makeshift morgues, including 625 St. Philip Street. With all the dead that were stored here, it's really no surprise the place is said to be haunted. Folks will report lights flickering or dimming in the bathrooms on their own. Staff also say the plugs are sometimes mysteriously pulled from the bar's refrigerator. The toilets are said to sometimes overflow, with plumbers consistently finding nothing wrong with the pipes. St. Louis Cathedral, once again in the French Quarter. This spot holds the title of the oldest cathedral in the United States, which is still in use. Began construction in 1718, with the final version completed in the 1850s. One of the prominent ghosts associated with this place is Pierre Antoine, who was a priest from 1774 until his death in 1829. Antoine famously baptized Mary Laveau, the renowned voodoo queen of New Orleans, and officiated her marriage to her first husband. So people will say they see Antoine's spirit strolling through an alleyway named after him, right beside the church. He's also said to quietly sing while peering through the stained glass windows. But there are a couple of other ghosts said to make appearances here, a couple we've covered earlier, like John Lafitte, like John Lafitte and Delphine Lalaurie. And we close out our haunted New Orleans tour with another cemetery, St. Louis number 1, said to be the most haunted cemetery in the entire city. Not only that, but it's also a pretty unique one. So here, many of the dead are buried above ground in tombs. There are some pretty prominent figures buried here, including Mary Laveau, so it's no surprise she's said to haunt the cathedral, about a 15-minute walk away. There are countless stories of apparitions, strange sounds, and other seemingly unexplainable things taking place here, and although one story goes that Delphine Lalaurie died and was buried in Paris, there's also a rumor that her remains were brought back to New Orleans and buried right here in this cemetery.
Starting us off at number 10 is Dan Cooper. Back in 1971, a man who went by the alias Dan Cooper hijacked a commercial plane and no one has ever been able to find him since. According to those involved, shortly after takeoff, he handed a note to a flight attendant claiming to have a his briefcase. He demanded 4 parachutes and $200,000 in $20 bills, which is the equivalent of like $1.2 million nowadays. Otherwise, he was going to kill everyone on the plane. After the flight landed in Seattle, Cooper released the 36 passengers once authorities had provided him with the money and parachutes, but but kept both pilots, one flight engineer, and flight attendants as hostages on the plane. From there, he forced them to fly to Mexico City, but somewhere over Nevada, Cooper jumped off the plane with the stolen cash. The FBI launched a massive search that is still considered one of the longest and most exhaustive investigations in FBI history. But Dan Cooper has yet to be found, and I'm sure many agents lost sleep over trying to figure out this case. Moving on to number 9, the West Mesa bone collector. Back in 2009, a woman on a leisurely walk with her dog came across something peculiar. A human bone. Little did she know, she'd stumbled upon a major crime scene. Upon her discovery, authorities became immediately involved and discovered that it was a mass grave filled with human remains. But how did they get there? A killer dubbed the West Mesa bone collector. Active between 2001 to 2005, the killer was known to target young women, usually Hispanic and almost always involved in late night services or the trade, but not exclusively, which made it hard to identify why he chose his victims. While we know practically nothing about the killer, we do know that he would take the bodies to the desert to dispose of them. After years of police investigation, the remains of 11 women were found scattered in the deserts of Albuquerque, but the exact way they died is yet to be discovered, as medical examiners and forensic experts have not been able to identify his methods, which is very unusual. Sadly, neither police or FBI have ever been able to track down who was responsible for ending these young women's lives, and I am sure the agents on the case are continually disturbed by the fact that he remains on the loose. Moving on to number 8. Glendon Scott Crawford. In 2012, Glendon Scott Crawford, who was a part of the Pointy Hat white supremacist group, conspired with a guy named Eric Fate to turn an industrial-grade X-ray radiation device into a weapon of mass destruction. The plan was to have a remote-controlled death ray he could use on Muslims in the United States, targeting mosques, community centers, and so on. So Crawford sought assistance from Chris Barker, one of the Imperial Wizards in his hate group. However, what Crawford did not know was that Barker, in an effort to handle his own felony charges, had become an informant for the FBI. This led to another FBI agent coming on the case undercover, and eventually, once there was enough evidence stacked against Crawford's plan to commit acts of he was sentenced to 30 years behind bars. Still, I can only imagine how disturbing it must have been for those undercover agents to be in the same room with such a disgusting man. Moving on to number 7, Richard Trenton Chase. Often referred to as the Vampire of Sacramento, Chase was a truly terrifying killer who took the life of 6 people in just 1 month back in 1977. Before he turned to human victims, Chase would capture animals and bring them back to his apartment to kill and disembowel. From there, he would eat them raw, sometimes mixing them with Coca-Cola in his blender. Then in 1973, Chase was forcibly admitted to an institution after being taken to emergency for trying to inject rabbit's blood into his veins. While in the facility, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and became known as the Vampire, as he all too often killed animals and drank their blood. But by 1976, he was deemed no longer a threat to society and released back into his mother's custody. Tragically, she began weaning him off his medication, believing he didn't really need it, and once again he slipped into old habits. But this time it wasn't birds and rabbits Chase was harming, he was breaking into homes and killing people before treating them just as he did his animals. Eventually he was put on trial for his 6 victims, and a jury ruled him guilty, rejecting the defense's attempt that he could not be tried due to insanity. Chase was sentenced to death, but ended up taking his own life while behind bars before his execution. Coming in at number 6, Daniela Green. Born in Germany, Daniela moved to the US with her family before she was hired as a contract linguist for the FBI in 2011. While working at the FBI, they made use of her bilingual skills and ended up assigning her to a German terror criminal known as Individual A at the time. Through research, Green discovered her subject was a former rap artist named Dennis Kuisbert, who had joined, that group, and over time, Green found ways to correspond with Kuisbert. However, in a shocking turn of events, their relationship turned romantic. Soon Green made secretive plans to fly out to Syria and meet him, and within hours of her arrival, the two got married. But it didn't take long before she realized what a mess she found herself in and ended up emailing an acquaintance for help. Within 5 weeks, American authorities caught up to her. Green was arrested and returned to the US, but was released after only 9 months in jail, and the FBI spun her involvement with Cuthbert as that of an unsuspecting linguist duped by a conniving criminal. Still, I can only imagine how disturbing it must have been for everyone involved, knowing that one of their own had double-crossed them and married the literal enemy they were trying to take down. Next up at number 5, Robert Hansen. Known in the media as the Butcher Baker, Hansen was an extremely sick killer who quite literally viewed his victims as prey. In his adolescence, Robert was an awkward and shy boy who had absolutely no luck with girls. These early rejections festered into a deep hatred for women, for which he later would seek revenge. As he got older, he began finding solace in archery and hunting, and would routinely spend his time perfecting his craft alone in the woods. Then, in the early 1960s, he began seeking revenge, at first by committing arson on his high school property, but then soon turned to seek revenge on women specifically. By 1971, he was kidnapping and taking advantage of women, but not yet killing. He was charged and sentenced to 5 years for his crimes, but after just 6 months was released on a work program. After his release is where it really got scary. He began kidnapping women and escorts, taking them back to his apartment where he would do awful things to their bodies, before flying them out to secluded areas in the wilderness and telling them he was going to hunt them down and kill them. Tragically, an estimated 21 women lost their lives to this monster, but thankfully he was convicted and sentenced to 461 years in prison without possibility of parole. Moving on to number 4, Albert Fish. Also known as the Brooklyn Vampire, Albert Fish was a terrifying killer responsible for the death of 3 people in the mid-1920s, although according to him, it was well over 100. Fish grew up in an unstable home. Both his parents suffered from mental illness, and after his father died, he was sent to live at an orphanage. While there, he was by the other orphans, but he started to develop a rather confusing feeling towards the pain. He began to enjoy it. As Fish got older, he started seeking darker and more twisted things to feel alive, and soon that led to the kidnapping, taking advantage of, killing, and later devouring of minors. Thankfully, the monster was caught in 1935, and shockingly, he wasted no time denying his atrocities. In fact, he almost seemed proud of them. I can't, and frankly won't, go into detail about what he did, but it is some of the most disgusting stuff I have ever read about. And I can only imagine the agents on his case felt the same. Eventually, Fish was sentenced to death and died by electric chair in 1936. After his death, his lawyer refused to release his final statement, saying, quote, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I have ever read." Next up at number 3, Michael James Pratt. Currently on the FBI's top 10 most wanted, I can only imagine how disturbed the FBI was when they first became aware of this case. Between approximately 2012 to 2019, Michael Pratt, along with a few accomplices, was involved in recruiting underage girls to be a part of an adult film production company that he owned and operated. Pratt lured the girls in under Craigslist ads asking for models, and from there he promised payment in exchange for a clothed modeling gig. But sadly, this couldn't have been further from what he had planned for the victims. Beyond the obviously morally despicable stuff they were making these girls do, he would also force past victims into providing false assurance to the girls that their films would never end up online. Allegedly, some of the victims were not permitted to leave locations until the shoot was completed, others were forced to perform after declining participation, and the crew was also known to commit SA when the girls wouldn't comply. After fleeing the country in 2019, right before his trial for his crimes, he was added to the FBI list, and the search for this creep continues. Moving on to number 2, Mark Putnam. In the mid-1980s, Mark Putnam was a happy husband, father, and successful FBI agent. But after relocating to the Bureau's Pikeville office, things began to change. At this time, Carl Edwards Lockhart, a notorious bank robber, had just been let out of prison, and Putnam believed that he was back to his old ways. So he began gathering informants that could help him take down Lockhart. One of these informants was Susan Smith, addicted divorcee raising a family who needed the cash. But soon, she became more than just Putnam's informant. The two began an affair, and by 1989, Smith was allegedly pregnant. This terrified Putnam. He knew it would not only ruin his marriage, but end his career, and so he demanded a paternity test and explained he and his wife could adopt from her. This, however, led to a violent fight between them that ultimately ended with Putnam strangling Susan to death. Initially, the suspect was Susan's ex-husband, but soon Putnam was interrogated, and after failing a polygraph, he confessed to the whole thing and offered to lead the FBI to where she was. However, there are a few mysteries. Susan Smith's sister claimed that FBI agent Ron Poole, Putnam's superior, not only knew about Smith's alleged pregnancy, but also disclosed to Smith information about Putnam's illicit activities with other informants. And allegedly, medical examiners claimed that they were unable to find any trace of a fetus during an autopsy on Smith, who should have been 4 months pregnant. I mean, it's just all disturbing top to bottom. And last up in our number 1 spot, the Brianna Dennison case. Brianna Dennison was a college student home for the holidays in Reno, Nevada, when tragically one night she went missing while staying over at a friend's house. In the days following, the Reno Police Department conducted an investigation at her friend's home where she had last been seen and concluded she had been abducted after discovering male DNA on a doorknob and her own on a pillowcase. At this point, the FBI became involved in the search, and after investigations linked the male DNA to other open cases involving sexually violent crimes, they worried that the missing girl's fate had already been decided. And sadly, nearly a month after she had gone missing, Brianna was found dead in a ditch. That fall, after lengthy investigations, interrogations, and DNA samples, they finally found the man guilty of the crime, James Biella. And it came out that he had actually held her captive in his home for several days, harming and doing awful things to her body before he eventually killed her. And to top it off, he lived 1 block from FBI agents, 2 sheriffs, and a local police officer. So he was literally doing it all under their nose.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the vulnerability. According to Forbes, there was a company called Checkmarx who found quite the vulnerability a few years ago when it came to Alexa devices. Basically, the company works to test the security of different devices, and when they were running Alexa through the checks, they found something that might turn your assistant into a device that just listens to and records every single thing you say. Basically, Alexa has a function where it listens for follow-up commands from the user. What I mean by this is, should you set an alarm, Alexa might reply and ask you if you meant AM or PM, and it's during this sort of follow-up period where the vulnerability shows itself. The team was able to gain access quite easily by installing malicious code into what would seem like an innocent app. In this case, it was a calculator. After doing this in a normal Alexa, there would only be a certain list of phrases that would have the device listening for a follow-up question, but now with this malicious code, they found a way for Alexa to listen for the follow-up, but without any word, meaning they could essentially tap in anytime they wanted. Apparently the good news is that Amazon has fixed this in response to the hack. They said, quote, "Customer trust is important to us and we take security and privacy seriously. We have put mitigations in place for detecting this type of skill behavior," reported by Checkmarx. While it seems safe, hearing these sorts of possibilities does make you pretty nervous about what could be hiding behind your Alexa. In our number 9 spot today, we have the listeners. If you own an Alexa device, you can download this thing, and then once you have it, you can ask Alexa to ask the listeners, and something spooky happens. Amazon describes it as, quote, "an experiment in language art that provides, if you simply keep asking to continue, many fragments of both scripted and improvised speech in an intriguing, emergent narrative. You will never hear the listeners say exactly the same thing twice, but the listeners is not a chatbot or an AI. They are more of a drama or a simple game? Get started with Alexa, ask the listeners, and then continue, go on, or try something like, I am filled with joy, or what are you feeling? The listeners will suggest ways to transact with them. You might also want to ask them, let the other voices speak. What in the actual hell did I just read? That sounds absolutely frightening. And to be honest, all of the reviews on Amazon say the exact same thing. People who experienced it said it scared the heck out of them, so I think I'll take their word for it. In our number 8 spot today, we have The Argument. There was a Reddit thread a few years ago that prompted the question, what is your creepy Alexa story? A user named Meat Macho replied to the thread, and they definitely delivered quite the story. Basically, they explained that one day they and their wife were having an argument. Of course, no one is having a good time, and it's definitely not a time to be playing tricks on each other, so neither of them could explain what happened next. They wrote, quote, wife and I were arguing about something, no clue what it was, but it was getting a little heated. I don't know what Alexa thought she heard, but she suddenly interjected with, why don't we change the subject? It was just so unexpected and relevant enough to be creepy. We both heard it, and we both still talk about it years later. There was nothing in the app logs. I guess Alexa isn't just a trusty assistant, she's also a marriage counselor. While she may have worked to possibly stop the fight between these two, I'm sure she also instilled a new fear that neither of them knew that they had before. In our number 7 spot today, we have Are You Recording Me? So we've all had to call into some sort of customer service line where we get the automated message, or the person on the other end tells us that the call may be recorded for quality assurance purposes or training or whatever it is. It's a law thing, they gotta let you know. In fact, if you ask Siri this question, are you recording me, she'll get kind of confused and respond that she's unsure of what you mean, but she could do an internet search for you. Alexa, on the other hand, she's not so slick with her secrets, at least not in the past, because some users reported something creepy happening after asking Alexa the same question. Well, I'm sure all of the legalities to this one are located in the terms and conditions and all of that good stuff. It doesn't make it any less creepy that when some people ask Alexa if she was recording them, Alexa just didn't respond at all and suddenly shut off. She's just out here ignoring people. She's dodging questions, and that only makes me have more questions. I'm not even sure if this is enough to get me to read the terms and conditions though. It's the most often lie I've ever told. In our number 6 spot today, we have the greetings. So apparently there are rumors that Alexa can speak to people that have already passed away. If that's really true, we don't talk about that enough. Of course, my brain was immediately skeptical upon hearing this information, but some people swear it's true. Apparently, if you ask Alexa to greet people, some have experienced her coming back to them with the name of a deceased loved one. Another person experienced their Alexa without being asked anything, and only when they turned on one specific light in the house would say hello and then the name of their grandmother who had passed 3 years prior. This person was incredibly confused and totally freaked out by this because it didn't just happen once, it happened multiple times. They explained that they also didn't have an Alexa during the time that she was alive, and that she also doesn't believe she ever spoke her grandmother's name out loud in front of the Alexa. Maybe this was just some weird coincidence, but it certainly sounds like Miss Alexa is giving off some major Ouija board vibes. In our number 5 spot today, we have the spy device. This crazy Alexa story is so freaky that I just had to share it with you guys. This story starts off in the midst of the storyteller's mom going through a divorce, which we all know can be a messy situation. So the ex-husband in this situation had apparently planted an insane amount of hidden cameras throughout the house that they had to search for to find once the pair had split up. There were entrances and exits, the living and dining room, the hallways, the bedroom, everywhere in the house was being monitored. Then they found out that he had bugged her laptop so as to be able to have remote access to it, and then when she took her car in for an oil change, the mechanic found a tracking device that had been placed on it. This was all found during the separation era, but once the divorce process actually started, things got even creepier. They wrote, quote, once the divorce started and he officially moved out, we scanned the entire house for bugs and didn't find anything. So we really freaked out when he started calling, texting, emailing her, complimenting her outfits, asking how her friends were as they were in the house, asking how her trip to the store was, and other really odd things he couldn't have known about. As it turns out, this guy somehow connected his phone to the Alexa dot beforehand, and he was now using it to record whoever was close enough to the Alexa to be picked up on the mic, and at this point he was still able to access the laptop and its camera. How absolutely horrifying is that he was literally using the Alexa to spy on them. It's scary, it's disgusting, and it definitely makes you question every single person who might be connected to your devices. In our number 4 spot today, we have the spooky story. You can ask Alexa to tell you a scary story and she will happily oblige. There isn't really a catch with this one, to be perfectly honest. If you want a scary story, you'll receive one, so just make sure you're really ready and in the mood before asking your assistant for a fright. This can be an awesome tool for people looking for a spooky tale, for anyone in the home who needs some chilling entertainment, but beware, these stories can be a little too scary for some. There was a video posted to the internet in October of last year where some people at a sleepover asked Alexa to tell them a spooky Halloween tale, and things very quickly went awry. They were all way too terrified of the story Alexa told next and couldn't get the Alexa to stop. They were all sufficiently freaked out and reacted in a way that I know will be a core memory for the years to come, and they definitely learned not to ask Alexa this question. In our number 3 spot today, we have the local spots. This is a creepy story that took place back in 2018 and happened to the owner of an Amazon Echo, which of course features Alexa. Basically, this person explained that they had returned home one night and everything was fine. Nothing out of the ordinary happened at all, until, totally unprompted, their Alexa just started talking. This was definitely weird, but things turned super creepy when they realized what it was that their Alexa was saying. As it turns out, their Alexa, out of the blue, just started listing off local cemeteries and funeral homes to them. How eerie is that? This story was posted to Twitter by the user @HeyIt'sCamo, and they finished off their tweet by saying, quote, "I'd rather it laugh at me, TBH. Me too, Camo. Me too." Apparently their theory behind this one is that maybe their Alexa wants them dead because they play the same Spotify playlist over and over again. In our number 2 spot today, we have 20 questions. So I didn't know this, but apparently you can play 20 questions with Alexa, and she is also frighteningly good at it. A little too good sometimes, however, and that is exactly what prompted the Reddit user PelPel4 to ask the Reddit question, "What is your creepy Alexa story?" The user decided to ask the internet this question after a strange 20 questions with Alexa encounter that they and their wife had. They explained, quote, "My wife and I were playing 20 questions and, spoiler alert, our answer was pig. We got through until the end and Alexa guessed Basenji." Now, I don't know how many of you know what a Basenji is, but they're a very rare barkless dog and I happen to have one. We've bought some Basenji themed things off of Amazon before, so it's either that or she's listening. But I mean, come on, she didn't even say dog, straight to Basenji. Anyone else have similar stories? That would definitely be pretty unsettling, to say the least. Not that a pig and a dog are like the most unsimilar things, it's just how she was so specific with this breed. It must have been stored in there somewhere, right? In our number 1 spot today, we have Don't Go. This creepy Alexa story comes from the Reddit user MyThaiGuy72, and they said, quote, "I got woken up at 4 a.m. this morning to Alexa repeating some incoherent phrase over and over. She was saying something like, 'Don't go into the house,' but I really couldn't fully understand it. It was sort of a mumble. By the time I came downstairs, she had repeated it about 4 or 5 times. I listened 1 or 2 more times to try and figure out what the hell it was saying exactly, but never could. I just unplugged the damn thing and I have no plans of turning it back on." Is it just me or does that sound like Alexa was watching some kind of a horror movie? Like, "Don't go into the house." It's so terrifying, especially to hear in the middle of the night. I don't blame this person for unplugging the thing and leaving it somewhere to be forgotten about. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Death. This is said to be a lost episode of Barney and Friends that recently came to light on TikTok. Many users were claiming that they were now remembering this dark episode that they had watched many years ago, and people were claiming that this episode was so dark that it made them feel basically traumatized. While Barney and Friends usually had episodes that taught us the value of friendship and good relationships, this episode is said to have had a much darker tone and allegedly only aired 1 single time. The episode in question is said to have been called Death, and many people have claimed that when the theme music started to play, you could hear a sort of creepy whispering just behind the music. After this, everything seemed to return to normal until Barney awoke. When Barney spoke, it was both the sound of his normal giggly voice, but there was also something darker behind it, like another voice underneath that was darker and slower and just sinister sounding. Apparently, this is the episode where Barney said that he was going to teach about death. People on TikTok have said that the episode ends with Barney going on a rampage and killing all of his friends on set, and at the end, he's still saying the classic "I love you, you love me" song, but just in a bit more of a screamy, demonic way than I think any of us are used to. So yeah, while I'm not entirely sure that this episode ever existed, if it did, I think it's probably for the best that it just stays lost. In our number 9 spot today, we have The End. This Barney story has one of the darkest endings, I think, of any episode on this list. Before the airing, this particular episode was marketed as an unreleased episode that would only be airing that night. Everyone gathered to watch this new, exciting episode, but for some reason when the episode started, something was off. As the music in the beginning started to play, it just wasn't quite right. Before long, the video started to cut in and out with whatever this tape was. Suddenly, in the Barney parts of the tape, Barney was alone, without anyone around. It was really hard to make out exactly what he was saying because the audio was so distorted, but the entire thing had a very chilling energy to it. As the video progresses, the clips get more and more choppy and cut in and out more, but we see Barney with something dangerous, preparing to do what some have described as harm himself. In all copies that exist of this lost episode, this is where they stop and the tape goes black. Many people believe this is because whoever created this dark episode cut the ending out to save us all from the horrors that the original tape held. In our number 8 spot today, we have Barney's Spooky Cemeteries stories. This story about a lost Barney episode was a story by The Shadow Reader, and basically it starts off when the creators of Barney decided one year to make a Halloween special. I personally love a good Halloween special, so that sounds great. Basically, the idea for it was to take 3 classic spooky tales and retell them, but give them a Barney spin. You know, make it a bit of a lighter story with some good lessons hidden inside. This episode ended up accidentally getting sent to a new animation studio instead of the one that they were meant to be sent to, but no one caught this mistake. This new animation studio was said to be quite a risque one that specialized in adult animation, and they had quite a crude sense of humor. Cut to the day that the episode airs. Well, this episode was cut 8 minutes into airing because what happened next was the retelling of tales, but it was even more horrific than the originals. It was gory, it was scary, and it was just awful. Of course, no one wanted to be culpable for how this episode somehow made it to air for the 8 minutes it did, so all copies were immediately deleted. It is said that, save for a few recorded versions of people who were ready to tape the Halloween special at home, the episode has been completely lost. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Barney toy. This creepy Barney story starts off when there was a new product on the market. It was a toy version of Barney, but this toy had a special capability. It allowed viewers of the show who had the toy to participate, have a more visceral learning experience using the toy and certain episodes made for it. This all sounds fine and well and like a great new technology for fans of the show, until one person received their new Barney toy. Everything was going well with the new toy, they loved it, so much so that even when not watching the interactive episodes, they still got their Barney toy to watch the regular episodes alongside. One day, the dad in this situation was listening in from another room as they hung out and spoke to their Barney toy. It seemed very cute and sweet and so sincere, like they were actually talking to a real living thing, not a toy. That was until the dad felt like he could now hear a low, grumbling voice speaking back. Well, as it turns out, this Barney doll had some kind of a curse or a demon living inside of it, and when the dad noticed something wrong, of course, the evil entity tried to do everything it could to make sure that no one listens to him. From here, all hell breaks loose, and the entity in the doll ends up having control over the son, which leads to an exorcism being performed. A priest is called and thankfully able to rid the son of the entity, and placed it back in the toy, which is now said to be locked up and buried somewhere secret so that hopefully no one ever stumbles upon it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the day on set. This creepy legend starts off with someone taking note of how a lot of the friends that appear on the show, you only see them once or twice before they suddenly just disappear, never to be seen again. This person took note of this after they spent a day on set, as they were one of the lucky ones who was going to be one of the friends on the show, but after leaving that day, they definitely will never be returning. As soon as they got there, things just weren't as expected. There was a very heavy and dark energy in the air, and once they saw Barney, they felt like something cold was there, rather than a warm, welcoming person that they had expected. They began to rehearse for the day, and this is when they began to realize even more grim stuff around the set. There were dangerous tools left out in plain sight, way too close to everyone who was supposed to be getting ready to perform. They began to notice some red spots on some of the costumes, especially Barney's, and when they mentioned it, everyone in the costumes just eerily and blankly stared at them. This all made them feel extremely uneasy, and it led to them trying to find a way to go home early because they knew they just needed to leave. There were red flags everywhere. They explained to the crew that they suddenly weren't feeling well and that they think they needed to go home, and this is when all of the actors stood there, silently staring at them. They stood there unsure of what to do for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably about 30 seconds, and when no one moved or responded, they began to walk for the door. This is when all of the actors in costumes grabbed the tools laying around the set and suddenly started running towards them, trying to catch them before they could get out the door. They ran as fast as they could and luckily reached the door before any of the actors got to them and were safe once they stepped outside. I mean, the costumed actors weren't going to burst out of the studio because they didn't want to get caught in their maniacal plans. In the end, it's safe to say that this person never watched another episode again, and they got their answer as to where all of the friends on the episodes go to. In our number 5 spot today, we have The Trip. This rumored lost episode is a bit of a light-hearted break in some of these extremely dark stories we've been talking about. This episode is said to have been one where Barney had a bit of a slip-up accidentally. Playing the role of Barney probably isn't an easy one. You have to be perpetually joyful while moving and dancing around in a giant purple dinosaur costume, and I'm sure the job can be frustrating at times. This all leads up to one day while filming, the actor playing Barney was having a particularly difficult day, personally and professionally. Of course, the show must go on, so he suits up, starts the show as per usual. Everything is going fine, but on this day, a member of the set team hadn't quite run some of the lines through the set properly. And what I mean by this is that there were some cords that were on the floor and they weren't taped down properly or marked, which becomes quite a tripping hazard. If you've worked as a performer before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This all leads to one moment in the show when everything has been going smoothly. Barney is in character and moving around the set, but he gets to the area with the untaped wires and it causes him to trip. In an act of frustration and probably a little terror, as well, I mean, tripping in full dinosaur costume isn't exactly ideal, this man on live television lets out a series of expletives as he falls, right in front of everyone on set and the thousands watching at home. Safe to say the episode that day was cut short and definitely never aired again. In our number 4 spot today, we have the DVD. This story starts off with someone going to the store to buy a DVD, which is so funny to me because that immediately just dates this story. How weird is that? Anyway, as they found their DVD and were about to head to pay, they accidentally stepped on something and heard a cracking sound. When they looked down, they realized that they had stepped on a DVD case of a Barney and Friends. This DVD had 6 episodes on it, and when they picked it up and examined it, they decided that maybe this was just meant to be, so they bought it. They didn't use this DVD right away, however. I mean, it was a bit of a last-minute impulsive purchase, but when the time did come, they put the DVD into the player and nothing happened. They took it out of the player and looked at it to see if there was damage or if it needed a quick cleaning, but they found nothing, so once again they put it back into the machine, and this time it started. The menu pops up first, and when it did, something seemed off. There weren't many options and there was no music playing, but hey, that's not too bad. They hit play on the first episode, and it starts off with Barney sitting on a bench looking sad. He sat there in silence for quite a while before he finally spoke. "Nobody loves me anymore. I will teach them a lesson," he said, before looking directly into the camera and smiling a horrifying smile. Suddenly, someone begins walking down the road near Barney. As they pass him, Barney jumps up and scares him before grabbing him by the leg and pulling him. He pulls so hard that his entire leg comes off. Barney grabbed the other leg and kept dragging him back off the road into the bushes beside it. From here, the most gruesome things happen that I certainly cannot go into detail about, but it's safe to say that Barney had taken the life of this person. The person watching the DVD was of course absolutely horrified at what they had just watched, scared of what would happen next, so they immediately got the disc out of the player. They took the disc outside, smashed it with a baseball bat as much as they could, and then threw it into the woods. They were plagued with nightmares for weeks after, and they finished off their story with this harrowing message. Quote, "If you ever find a copy of it, never ever view it. Try to burn it or smash it if you can. If you view it, those horrible nightmares come flooding in." In our number 3 spot today, we have The Friends. There is rumored to be a lost episode of Barney that has a part where all of the friends in the episode turn on him. What usually is a fun, loving time with lots of learning quickly turns horrendous, but not for the reasons I would have expected. Barney's kind of freaky, like I mentioned at the beginning. He's a little creepy, and if something went wrong on this show, I always expected that it would be Barney that went haywire. But in this lost episode, the roles were really reversed. It isn't quite clear exactly what Barney did, but suddenly everyone just decides that they've had it with putting up with him. It starts with one friend, but suddenly everyone starts joining in and everything erupts into chaos. There is yelling, there is fighting, people are getting hurt, the set is being destroyed, and then suddenly everything just goes blank and the episode was cut short. This episode is said to have only aired once, and the screen going blank was because the network playing it had cut it off due to the violence. This means that no one knows how the episode ends or what happens. Did everyone kiss and make up? Was there a gruesome, gory ending? And how did this episode make it to air in the first place? No one, except for the person who made it, knows the answers to any of these questions, and we're all just left to speculate. In our number 2 spot today, we have The Theory. Rather than a lost episode, this is more like a horrifying Barney theory, and basically it suggests that either the person who plays Barney in the costume is stuck in there and can never come out, or that Barney actually has no one in there. He's just a real sentient creature that is stuck doing this show over and over again. In both of these scenarios, Barney is being held against his will and forced into doing this work, and should he not deliver a happy, joy-inducing performance, he will be subjected to horrible punishments as a result. It's a terrible and terrifying theory, but since I first heard it, I can't stop thinking about it. Whether you believe it or not, it definitely adds an eerie layer to any episode because it will always linger in the back of your mind. What if? In our number 1 spot today, we have The Real Dinosaur. There are rumors of an episode that exists, and I'm gonna be honest, no one is really sure exactly what happens in this episode, but it doesn't even matter because there is one thing that no one who has seen this episode will ever forget. In the episode, Barney, the purple dinosaur, at some point turns into a very real, very terrifying, and very hungry dinosaur. Yep, goodbye songs and hugs, hello gigantic growls, and people running for their lives. All anyone who has seen this episode can remember is that while everyone quickly runs away, not everyone can escape the wrath of Barney, the real dinosaur. The episode featured gruesome carnage, and Barney tore his way through everyone and everything that he could. In the end, however, the episode gets even darker because Barney turns back into his regular, loving self and now has to face the consequences of what he did while he was in this monster form. It isn't clear exactly how this transformation happened, but it is clear that everyone involved and everyone who saw this episode still lives with the trauma today.
Hey, check out this video next. It's about interesting creatures that we found in Chernobyl. These animals should not exist here, but yet they do, and we have many documented cases with these strange hybrid creatures. Click the video now to find out more.